everyone, and welcome to our Masterclass session. We're running these every other month. The format is meant to be a topic presentation. In this one, we have Wendy McHenry is going to present for us. And today's topic is going to be how to handle in-person meetings. We were just kind of chatting on that as we were starting up. A lot of us getting back into that routine of traveling again. Most of us haven't been doing any in-person meetings for quite a while now. But then also just the idea of there are people that have entered the pre-sales profession in the last 2 years that may not have ever done an in-person meeting. So the idea of today's session is to hear a little bit from Wendy on her experiences, some of the things that she's been seeing, advice on things to watch out for, things to consider. And then we'll break out into smaller groups to talk amongst ourselves. And the whole goal of that breakout time, please stick around for it if you can. The idea of the breakout time is it gives you a chance to meet other people that are in the pre-sales community, both for networking, getting to know some other folks, and then also just discussing your personal experiences, hearing what other people are doing, tips and tricks that other people have seen along the way. So with that, I'll talk through a little bit of our agenda. As I mentioned, Wendy is going to present today on the topic, and then we go into our group discussions. We have some sample questions. We'll throw these out just as conversation starters, but it's not meant to be the, hey, make sure you talk through question 1 and then go through question 2. We want that to be a very open discussion. And part of why we're not recording that part is we do want you to be open, to speak freely. Don't mention company names. Don't talk about who you're going to see or what's happening, because we do want everybody to treat it as confidential, but you are sharing it in a public forum. After the group breakouts, we will dismiss straight from there. You don't need to come back to the main lobby. We do want to try to wrap up a few minutes before the top of the hour. I'll send out a note as a reminder for that. And with that, Wendy, I will turn it over to you to introduce yourself and take us through the topic.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin. It's always great to be at the PreSales Collective. I'm Wendy McHenry. I'm a Director of Solutions Consulting at Pega. I'm based in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm also a WISE Council member for the PreSales Collective, and I'm a co-founder of Pega's WISE Chapter. I love to travel, and I will tell you, from my very first trip this year, I realized things are not at all the same as they were before the pandemic. And I'll tell you when I realized this. I was in line at security and the TSA agent leaned over and he leaned me in. He's like, Wendy, come down here and talk to me. And he said, do you know you have TSA pre-check? And I said, yes. He said, do you know you're not in the TSA pre-check line? He's like, I want you to go over to that line. It was very embarrassing. And that was when I realized I was incredibly out of practice. Then I got on my plane and I couldn't get my carry-on loaded the way I needed to. And it's not as automatic as it used to be. So I'd like to share with you some things I've learned through this process of getting back into business travel. And I'm really excited then for the breakout sessions to be able to hear from you what you're doing right now in the field in terms of your travel and what you're seeing and what's working for you, and any ideas we can share with each other. So Kevin, next slide. So before you go, clearing your calendar. So if your world has at all been like mine, we've developed this cadence of the back-to-back meetings. I have a lot of recurring meetings. I would say before the pandemic, those internal meetings were clustered on Mondays and Fridays. And then throughout the pandemic, they've kind of moved all throughout the week. So what I've done is before I have a trip, I go through and I try to move as many recurring meetings as I can, unless I'm going to be spending some dedicated time in an office where I can still do those. I do notify my team. I'm not going to be as responsive to emails and messages while I'm traveling. And I can tell you this was really helpful. I had an urgent situation arrive on a Friday afternoon. It was like 4 o'clock. I was literally boarding the plane, and my team member called me on my phone, which I don't know about you, no one calls me anymore. But it was great because he knew I was traveling. He knew what time my flight was, and he knew he still had a chance to reach me before I got on the plane. So doing that has been really helpful. It is hard. I am finding scheduling meetings right now is getting harder as people are starting to travel. So that meeting I want to have next week might actually take me 2 or 3 weeks to get all the parties involved to schedule. So that's something that I'm seeing. Updating your travel apps. I didn't even realize this, but when I went to my first trip and I was like, oh gosh, I gotta go update my Delta app. I gotta make sure my login is working. And then I realized, well, my JetBlue app needs to be updated. But also my Uber and Lyft, I realized my credit cards were expired. I needed to go through and get all of those done. I did the same thing for my daughter, who is a graphic designer, and her company is out of state. And I made sure she went in and did all the same things on her travel apps before she went. But it was good to go through and make sure I was updating all of those things. Also, bring your mask and your vaccine card if you need them. I recommend researching the COVID policy for travel. This is especially important, of course, if you're traveling out of country, and those policies and regulations are still shifting all the time. So it's a good idea to just check those things before you go. Packing all of your connectors, chargers, things like that, that actually took more time than I expected the first time I went. Check for all the supplies you need to run your demo. Don't assume you have them in your bag, because a lot of things in my bag, I took out of my bag and I'm using them in my home office. So I had to go through and find them. I had to update the battery and my travel mouse, for example. And and things like that, you don't want to be left hanging there on those things, especially even if it's down to, do you need markers for the whiteboard in the room, and thinking through what supplies do you need to go and grab. And packing your chargers is important too. Before the pandemic, I had a bag with all my chargers. I would keep them in. And again, those are now all over the house. So I had to go through and find all of those different chargers. Packing snacks. I'm going to talk about food a couple times because we all need to eat. And packing snacks has saved me so many times. So many airport restaurants are still not reopened. And with flight delays and things like that, and a lot of airlines are not serving food anymore, and some of them aren't even serving drinks depending on the flight. It can mean it's a long time between meals. So having that ability to go grab a snack out of your bag can really be helpful. And one tip I will also add, your badge. My first trip into the office, I could not find my badge. I happened to have moved during the pandemic. I knew where it was in my old house, but I couldn't find it in my new house. That took quite a while to find it. I did find it. And now I've stored it safely back in my travel bag. So the badge is another thing to go look for. And if you are traveling internationally, either personally or professionally, make sure you check that your passport or your required passport is up to date. And I've also heard from people whose TSA PreCheck or global entry had expired. So make sure you check those things. I am hearing the length of time to get those appointments for your passport is quite lengthy. I believe I was reading today that for United States, the passport appointments only go out 2 months, the app to book your appointments. And oftentimes these locations do not have appointments in those 2 months window. I know locally in Raleigh, people are driving an hour out to be able to get an appointment. And so that's another tip if you have to renew your passport. Don't delay doing that. So for example, one of my team members is going to Germany in July, and the first thing I told him to do was go work on his passport. Don't wait. Research your customer policies. This is really important. You want to at least ask about this. For example, some of our clients require proof of vaccination, even if the local area doesn't require them in areas like restaurants. Same thing with masking. I think out of consideration, you want to make sure you're asking them about their policies and their comfort levels with things like that. Also, in case they have any limitations on the number of people in the room. My most recent meeting, we had an uncomfortable number of people crammed into a conference room. So it's a good idea to go ahead and ask those things. Also, again, here's where food comes up again. I was really surprised the number of my favorite restaurants I had closed during the pandemic. So definitely plan ahead for meals, especially if you're taking a client to dinner. Also be aware your hotel may not offer the full suite of amenities they used to have, and the hotel restaurant may not be open the hours that you're used to. Also, take advantage of that time to practice. As SEs, we talk about this a lot, right? The importance of your rehearsal before your meeting. This is really important because I will say, even the most seasoned of us may have gotten rusty with our in-person presentation skills. So it's a good idea to practice before you go. I will say the number of times I have practiced for my husband, who does not work in tech, and he has seen and heard many of my demos and presentations. Okay, so are there any questions or comments about the before you go stage? And you can jump off mute or post in the chat.
Hi, Wendy.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, I had to get myself off
Oh,
of
that's
mute
okay.
there. This is Derek Marino. When we saw this particular session being lined up, it inspired us in our company to have a kind of an internal similar session. So thank you for being the inspiration of that. One of the things that we also came up with, and I think you talked about this in back-to-back meetings, is just really realizing the time the time it takes to get from the airport to customer site. You're
Right.
not going to make it to a customer meeting a half hour after you land.
Right.
So get used to, spacing out the meetings when you're in that new city over the day. That was something that came back to us a lot.
That is absolutely great advice. And I think I'll talk about this in a little bit of detail, but that is actually really great. Where in a day, I might have been able to do 2 or 3 meetings. Now I'm going to be realistic about what I can actually accomplish in that day, to allow as well for contingency planning, right? So I never know the amount of time it's going to take me to, again, find food, make sure we're getting lunch or an Uber or things like that. And being able to get transportation from the airport, which we'll talk about next. I think I love that your company is talking about that. We have some sort of travel committee, and they also helped me ideate on this as I saw them thinking this through. And we just released like a 15-minute video to our company about, now that you're getting back into travel, here are the things you need to know. So I love that. And so here, let's talk about the reality of what's going on with travel right now, at least what we're seeing in the US, right? And I think this is what you're alluding to. We have limited flight options, last minute flight cancellations, entire routes being canceled, higher airfares, limited service in hotels, and low car rental inventory. That is just the reality of what is happening in travel right now. So I recommend getting there a day early if you can. This helps you navigate flight cancellations and delayed flights. One of my team members last week had a meeting on Thursday, could not get any flights out on the Wednesday, the day before, and it wasn't because of weather. And the meeting had to be shifted to virtual because he couldn't get there. So I am really worried that we'll see that happen more and more. But if we can try to have those contingency plans in place, one way we might be able to do that is by getting there a day early if you can. So to your point, gone are the days I could land. I used to do this. I would fly into JFK in New York. I would land at 11 a.m. and I would be in Manhattan for a noon meeting. Those days are over. That's just not happening anymore. Maybe we'll get back to that, but that's, to your point, it's not happening right now. Another benefit of getting there early, right, is a chance for another rehearsal. This might be your opportunity to bring your team together in person to practice. So absolutely, I love that. Everything is more expensive than it used to be, right? Not just airfare, the food even. Someone called me and said, I just spent $24 a person on Chick-fil-A in Washington, D.C. So everything's just more expensive than it used to be. Uber and Lyft takes longer than it used to. My recommendation is maybe ask your client or who you're visiting and say, what's more reliable in your market? Is it Uber or Lyft? Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're different. It takes longer than it used to. There are fewer drivers, and the length of time in security at TSA, it can take longer too. My other piece of advice, be flexible. Be flexible. We do our contingency planning, but you still need to be flexible. I flew to a client meeting, and many people at the client tested positive for COVID, and the entire meeting had to shift to virtual, and I ended up doing that Zoom meeting from a hotel room. Did I really want to fly to do a Zoom meeting in a hotel? No. But we need to be flexible and adapt and have those backup plans of what's our plan if that kind of thing happens. And hopefully it won't happen, but I like to be prepared. I will share, we were talking about this before the meeting. I went to a conference and it was great. I was a little nervous to be with so many people at first, but it went great. And I will say, though, the biggest surprise I had was the conference ran from a Sunday to a Thursday, but many of the hotel restaurants were only open on the weekend. So that meant that Monday through Thursday, we had very limited options in terms of food. So it's good to prepare ahead of time. And somehow in all of my research before then, I didn't notice that. Or they didn't publish it. So any other advice or questions about getting there? That whole fun journey, the travel journey?
Good point. I'll just add, there's quite a few hotels that don't have room service too. So that's another thing that they used to have that's kind of not always available too.
That's a good point. To that point, I did find out, at least in Washington, D.C., the DoorDash drivers will bring the food directly to my room, which was great, actually, because I did eat some late night meals with DoorDash. I know it's not glamorous, right? Okay. All right. So time for the show. Again, get there early, right? You want to get there and check out the tech. And I would say allow more time for this than you used to allow for this, because of the hybrid meetings. You're testing the Wi-Fi, the projector, the cameras, the Zoom, test the technology in the room, test the audio and video, check it out. What will the remote participant experience be like? And for example, if you're using a physical whiteboard, how will the remote participants view it, engage with it? If we're using a virtual whiteboard like Mural, how will the in-person participants engage with it? I have done some hybrid meetings where everyone in the room connects to the Zoom, but not to the audio. So I have tried doing that. Also, check where the camera in the room, where they can view people. My last meeting where I was remote, I had someone sitting behind the camera and I couldn't see them. So that was just something I think if you check those things ahead of time, you'll understand. You especially want to make sure if you're presenting, any remote clients can actually see you and hear you clearly. Greeting protocols. My first few meetings, I'm going to be honest with you, were super awkward. Are we shaking hands? Are we hugging people? I'm a hugger, so I was excited to go and see some of my friends and give them a big hug. But you have that moment of what are we doing here? And then after I traveled a couple of times, I texted my husband and I said, well, it looks like handshakes are back. So I think the handshakes are making a comeback. I'm not really sure. It really does come down to personal comfort. So I think it's good to ask. I will say my last meeting, I was the only person in the room wearing a mask, but I've also had people then say, would you be more comfortable if I was wearing a mask? And I said, it's really up to you what you're comfortable with. But good to understand that for your client's comfort level. Let's talk about remote participants for a minute. How many of us before the pandemic really ignored our remote participants? We didn't really concern ourselves with engaging with the camera in the conference room. We didn't worry about sidebar conversations going on in the room. And now we've learned through the pandemic how to engage in this virtual space, but how do you combine these experiences for a meaningful hybrid experience? I do recommend working through identifying roles in the room. So any meeting facilitators, including you, should remind people to engage people virtually. So I've been in a couple of these hybrid meetings where I'm remote, and some of that's been good. I had one great experience where the camera in the room moved to where people were speaking, and I had someone who would say, "Hey, Wendy's trying to add something to the conversation." But I've had other meetings where I've had to practically yell and say, "Hey, I wanna say something." And I also had a bad experience where there were a lot of sidebar conversations. And what happens then, from a microphone perspective, it's really hard to hear what the presenter is saying. So when you're in the room, try to help mitigate that or identify who will mitigate that. When you're presenting, make sure you're interacting and making eye contact with both your in-person and your virtual audience. Work with your account team on the roles in the room. So can someone help monitor the Zoom chat, for example? Just like going through who is doing what during the meeting. And this can really be decided and worked out through your rehearsals. I will just say the most important benefit of being in person is the relationships. And you heard me say I'm a hugger, so I do like being able to do that again is great, but take advantage of that time to build relationships with your clients, with your partners, with your teammates. Enjoy those lunches and dinners, the in-person networking. And what I love the most about this job are the people I get to work with. Right now, I do think we're all craving that connection with each other. And when you do get that precious time to travel, make the most of it. So with that, any other questions about the show time, the day of? I'd love to hear if you have other ideas about remote participation.
Wendy, one thing I've done is I've taken a tripod with a webcam and put it out kind of in the middle of the table to deal with that whiteboard, me presenting, keeping that in one place. So at least what's being broadcast from my computer is my face, even if the room camera is moving around.
Right. Oh, that's a great idea. I really like that idea.